Well, Christine, welcome to the programme. Thank you very much for joining us. Your new book, Light the Flame, I'm going to be different and start at the very back of the book.
That is a new approach.
Because you say, at the end of your conclusion, your last words are, if I can do it, anyone can.
I utterly believe that.
But you're such an unusual person.
Oh, I don't think I'm an unusual person at all. I think I'm a very, very ordinary New Zealander. You know, I came from an incredibly difficult background, and the messages of my life were you can't do it, you're useless, you're lazy, you're ugly, you're fat, all of those things. And life was pretty awful on a day-to-day basis, and that's why it's called Light the Flame, because what I used to tell my people in my organisation, the 6,000 of them, over and over and over again, was that inside everyone is that little flame, and it's waiting to be lit. I honestly believe that all of us have got huge potential, and unfortunately the culture in this country does not let it blossom. You know, look at America, they grow their people. We criticise them all the time, but they grow their people, and they tell them it's the land of opportunity, they can be anything they want to be. So is New Zealand.
You've never talked much about your childhood before.
No.
But it was very tough. In a mining town on the west coast, your dad had a violent temper. Your childhood was very hard.
Horrible. Absolutely horrible. But you know, it's funny, as you get older and you reflect on your life, which I think most people do, I actually wouldn't change anything. I honestly believe that I've become the woman that I have become, who I quite like now. I didn't for a long time, but I quite like it now. I wouldn't have become that woman had I not gone through those things. And I think if I'd been born with a silver spoon in my mouth, so to speak, I probably would never have achieved what I have achieved.
Because your mum came from quite a well-to-do background.
She did, and in the midst of poverty and chaos, she brought us up with manners, and she was very particular about how she dressed, and she certainly made a statement, and some of those things have stuck.
Because she used to wear a fur.
She did.
Into blackball.
She did.
that must have made her stand out.
Yeah, she did stand out in that town, and of course people didn't like it. You know, we were a coal mining family and we didn't have anything. You know, my mother was a miracle worker, really. She fed us very well. She made all of our clothes. She didn't make her own. She did sometimes, but, you know, she managed to do the things that were precious to her, but she taught me a lot.
Mm. Your dad, though, was that was the real problem relationship in that family.
Oh, terrible. You know, he was a very violent man and no one could ever work out why, because he didn't drink. You know, a lot of people blame their parents' alcohol problems on the problems at home. He didn't. And he had like two personalities. He was this lovely man who charmed the world outside of the home, and he was a monster at home. He could also be incredibly kind and very loving, and so it was a confusing, you know, he would hit me and then he would take me to the shop because he felt guilty about what he'd done, and it wasn't just a hit. You know, these were regular, very severe beatings.
One of the things you talk about your mum, who didn't really step in to stop him.
No. On occasion she did, and I think there were times she saved our lives because his temper was so huge that he didn't know when to stop. And I saw my siblings get hidings where I thought they were going to die. You know, my sister didn't go to school for 3 weeks at one time because of the beating she'd had. But there were times she didn't step in, and there were times she encouraged him to do what he'd done. They had a very troubled marriage, and I think all of the frustrations, and both of them were unsophisticated. And what happens today and the kind of discussions we have in the world we live in was just dramatically different than that one.
Let's talk about WINS, because you came in at the bottom of WINS and ended up at the top. And you say in the book that your managers refer to you as a breath of fresh air. Where did that come from? Where did that reforming zeal come from?
Well, some of the management experiences I had early on actually changed my life, and I've talked about it in there. They fundamentally changed my life. And it was my first promotion, where it was at Takapuna District Office in Auckland, and from the day I walked in, the leaders in that organisation would say, how lucky we are to have you, you know, you're fantastic. And the more they told me, the more I was desperate to be that thing that no one had ever told me I was before. And I then came to understand that what we say to people is so important. You know, you've got to tell the people the good things, and tell them and tell them and tell them at every opportunity. And as New Zealanders, we don't like it much, but it's really important, and then you can tell them the bad things, because that's really important too.
And yet it came to a sticky end at WINS, despite your your positivity and public service, you say, is a real boys' club. Do you think it was the fact that you were a woman in a service that was largely run by men? Was that the problem?
Yes, and you know, for a long time, the feminist thing that went through the public service for years helped my career. There's no doubt about that. They were looking for women with talent to do something with, and I benefited from that. But the reality is, when I became the chief executive of the biggest government department with 2 school cert, or 3, I think I've got school cert subjects, I forget because they mean nothing, that was really unacceptable, and I never fitted that group of chief executives around me. They didn't let me fit. I came from the wrong side of the tracks, and I did not have the qualifications, and I was getting results that most of them had never thought about.
That was very hard though, that time.
It was terrible. It was really terrible, and I look back on it now and wonder how I survived.
Since then, you've done talkback radio, you've been an agony aunt on TV, you're a motivational speaker, you do management training. You're not exactly, you know, sitting around doing nothing.
Yes, my life is very full, and it's a very different life. I got offered quite a big chief executive's job recently, a huge one in fact, and I didn't want it. And my son was really shocked and said, you know, what's the matter with you? You know, this is one of the biggest jobs in the country. I don't want to be accountable in that way anymore. I don't want to spend 7 days a week, you know, 16 hours a day doing that kind of work. I've got a lot to offer, but not in that way. I want a life.
And yet you're tackling one of the toughest subjects facing New Zealand, child abuse.
Absolutely. It's one of my passions. It's probably my greatest public passion. And I do want to contribute to my country. I'm not afraid to speak out. I've been, I don't know, given courage from somewhere. And I'm determined to use that. And we've got a terrible, terrible problem, and we're not facing it. We're so politically correct we can't talk about the reality. We've got to grow up. Unless we take this seriously and fix it, it's going to get worse and worse, because we've now got something like 70,000 reported cases to Child, Youth and Family, which they can't cope with, and they don't cope with. But it's not their problem. The parents of New Zealand have to take responsibility for bringing up their babies. They've got to be the most precious things in our lives.
Well, may you continue campaigning. Christine, thank you very much.
Thank you.